Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Esther Zoldan, and on behalf of ADATH Teen Sisterhood, I want to welcome you to our speaker series. Please note that live transcript is available for those who need it or want it. You just have to turn it on in your Zoom. Tonight, we are absolutely thrilled to be featuring Lynda Fishman, author, motivational speaker, facilitator, camp director, and clinical social worker. I encourage you all to read her inspiring book, Repairing Rainbows. I've read it and found it to be both heartbreaking and uplifting. Lynda's signed books are available for purchase at the ADATH, or you can also order the book through Amazon. I would like now to introduce our moderator for this evening, Bonnie Chodes. Bonnie's connection to the ADATH is deeply rooted, as her grandfather, Sam Chodes, was a founding member of our congregation when it started out in Outremont. Bonnie is a vital member of our Sisterhood Planning Committee and was instrumental in bringing Lynda Fishman to our speaker series. So now I'd like to turn it over to our event chair and moderator, and we thank you, Bonnie, for facilitating this. Over to you, Bonnie Chodes.
Thanks very much, Esther, and welcome everybody. As the free world mourns and reflects on the 20th commemoration of September 11th, 2001, most of us easily recall the moment we first viewed the horrific images of the two planes crashing into the Twin Towers, the implosion of the buildings and the aftermath. We remember where we were as we stood frozen in shock and disbelief. And then the frantic search for survivors. So too can I clearly recall opening a letter from my grandfather, Sam Chodes, while I was away at sleepaway camp when I was 13 years old in July of 1970. He wrote, "Your Uncle Manny's sister Rita and her two daughters, Carla and Wendy, were killed in a plane crash. Lynda and her father Saul were not on that plane." Trembling and crying, I raced to the camp office, begging to break camp rules to phone home. Surely I had a valid reason to have my parents pick me up immediately to be with my cousins Gail and Pammy, my Uncle Manny, my Auntie Phyllis, my dad. Instead, my mom and dad denied my wishes, didn't give me permission to come home in their attempt to shelter me from this calamity. 51 years later, I still have a hard time making sense of my parents' decision. But it wasn't singular, but it was a common practice not to speak of sickness, death, tragedy. Even the Holocaust was in veiled secrecy at that time. Although I saw Lynda later over the years, we went to Israel on a summer trip together. We went to McGill together. I attended her and Barry's wedding, but I never brought up the subject. She and Barry moved away, and I received news about them through her Aunt Nikki or my cousins, and I continued to follow her much later on social media. I was just so happy to know that somehow, how was this smart, outgoing, confident girl whom I had played childhood games with, how did she not succumb to the dark world of depression, drugs, alcohol, who knows what? How was she okay? Smiling and laughing, having wonderful friends. Wow, who rescued her? This evening, we will hear how Lynda rescued herself by working hard, by paying her way through university, and by helping others. She will reveal her source of strength that gave her the will to be the best person she could be. Lynda holds a BA and master's degree in social work, along with her husband, Barry. Yes, a Prince Charming, definitely. Of 42 years She raised a beautiful family of 3 grown children, 2 grandchildren, and 3 rescue dogs, and many dogs over the years. They live in Toronto, where she owned and was director of a camp and still works to provide professional support to kids at Sleepaway Camp. Lynda is a retired college professor, a grief therapist, and recently began her own private practice. Lynda is a well-respected and sought-after motivational and inspirational speaker who has published many articles. As well, she wrote, and in 2010, she published her memoirs, Repairing Rainbows. But no formal education could have provided her with the PhD I believe she holds in empathy, compassion, and wisdom, which she earned with distinction. During my own recent bereavement, I turned to Lynda and to her book for help. I'm grateful to you, Lynda, for your invaluable insight and support, while my family and I continue to navigate the sudden loss of my life partner. I want to pay it forward. Lynda has generously agreed to share with you her story, her triumph, and her keys to leading a meaningful and happy life in spite of her tragic losses at such a young age. Inescapable challenges and all kinds of losses in the journey of life do not have to leave you defeated. Lynda, the floor is yours. Please, let's hear from you.
I can't speak now, Bonnie. Thank you. That was really, really incredible. Thank you so much. So much pressure now to hopefully share some insight and inspiration with people. And I just want to start by saying that I love the name of this series, that everyone has a story, because we never know what people are dealing with. We never know what skeletons they have in the closet. We never know what tragedies or losses people have had to endure through their lives and the choices that they made in order to move forward or not. And I think it's really important that we remember that everybody goes through loss, and loss doesn't necessarily have to be a death. People go through loss of their health. They lose marriages, jobs. We've learned in the last year and a half that we could lose our peace of mind and our control and our freedom. And loss does not happen and then unhappen. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember as we begin this talk, because no matter how much time goes by, it's not like after a certain amount of time, a loss just unhappens. And this weekend in particular, I think we're all very tuned into the fact that 20 years ago, the whole world changed with 9/11. And while it's 20 years ago, for some people, it's still as fresh as if it just happened yesterday. And for the people who lost family members and friends, that loss never went away and never will go away. For me, my tragedy, which happened 51 years ago, obviously, even though it was 51 years ago, it never ever went away either. And I had to learn how to build my life around that tragedy. But before I get into the details of what happened and how I somehow plowed forward with my life, I want to tell you a little bit more about my life. Bonnie did cover quite a bit, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but I'm 64 years old. Barry and I have been married for 42 years. So if you look at the first 2 slides, please, Rabbi, slide number 2 and slide number 3. That's me and Barry. And the next one, please. That's a more current one. Thank you. As Bonnie mentioned, we have 3 grown children and 2 grandsons. So the next slides, please. Slides 4 and 5 will show pictures of our kids and our grandchildren. We went to celebrate our 40th anniversary in Disney, and there's the 3 kids on the right, Rebecca, Jonathan, and Kimberly. Thank you. And the next one is our, next slide, please. That's our grandchildren, Ben and Zach. And as Bonnie mentioned, we have 3 dogs. So the next one, I can't do a presentation without showing our 3 dogs. Thank you. We live in Thornhill. We've both had amazing careers. As Bonnie mentioned, I started off as a hospital social worker, but I was a camp director for almost 25 years. I taught at a college in the social service worker program, and I've most recently been in private practice as a therapist. Barry has been the CEO of 4 companies, all in healthcare. So we're really proud of the careers that we've had, and we worked hard to make sure we did the best we possibly do. And we do consider ourselves extremely blessed and lucky and very grateful. And as you heard, life hasn't always been that easy. And I will tell you a little bit about what happened and then share some of the strategies that we believe are responsible for why we were able to move forward in our lives in a really positive way. So as Bonnie mentioned, in 1970, Bonnie and I are the same age. I was 13 years old. My mother and 2 sisters were killed in an Air Canada plane crash. The plane was going from Montreal en route to California with a stopover in Toronto. And due to pilot error, the plane crashed in Toronto and all 109 people on board died. The reason that I wasn't on the plane was I had gone to California the week earlier with my mother's parents, my maternal grandparents. We were supposed to spend a month in California for a bar mitzvah, the first bar mitzvah in the family for my cousin. And so I went the week before with my grandparents to set up the apartment that my aunt had rented for us so that we could live in it for the month. And I was one of these responsible 13-year-olds who liked to clean and organize. So I went with my grandparents earlier so that I could set it all up. And my mother and sisters were coming the week later, and my dad was scheduled to come the week after that. And obviously we had an amazing month scheduled. In addition to the bar mitzvah, we were going to go to Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland, and the whole family was going to be together, and it was supposed to be a really incredible month. Needless to say, we got a phone call in California at 5 o'clock in the morning on July 5th. That was a Sunday morning. And that was how we found out that the plane had crashed and nobody knew whether or not there were any survivors. So my grandparents and I and my aunt flew back to Montreal. And as soon as we landed, I don't know if everybody remembers the kinds of cameras they had back in the 70s, but big, huge flashes, and all these media people were there at the airport taking pictures of us and shoving microphones in our faces. And to be honest, as a 13-year-old who'd been woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I thought this was the coolest dream ever. That, you know, I felt like a movie star. They flew us home in business class, and, you know, all these people were shoving microphones in my face. And I thought, this is really cool, but soon I'm going to wake up and this is all going to be over. And obviously we quickly found out that this was in fact a true nightmare, and there was no waking up from this. So it's interesting. I've always kept diaries and logs of things. And not long ago, I was doing a presentation on what to say and what not to say at Shivas. And I came across notes of my own that I had written that people had said to us at the Shiva. And I'm just going to share them with you because it amazes me how we don't understand how some of the things we say to people who are grieving could be taken in such a different way than they're meant. And I'm sure they're always meant with the best intentions, but I actually wrote them down because I just want to let you know, as a 13-year-old, some of the things people said to me and my family, things like, I know how you feel and I know how hard this is. But then they'd say things like, it happened fast, at least they didn't suffer. Don't worry, time heals. In about a year, you'll be fine. This is all part of God's plan. At least they all died together and they're in a good place now. At least you still have your father. And most of what I heard throughout my life was, you're so strong, you'll get through this. And, you know, it's incredible the pressure that we put on people who have gone through a loss to be strong and get through it. And to this day, people still say that, and it comes from such a good place. I know that. But when I think about it, it's putting huge amounts of pressure on people to be strong when all they want to do is be weak and sad and face their grief. And back in the 70s, what we now know is that what they did back then was tell people to put your grief on the back burner, not face it, don't deal with it, don't talk about it. If you don't talk about it, somehow you'll get through it. And we actually know now that it's the opposite, that nothing makes me feel better. And I'm sure anyone who's gone through any loss of a loved one can agree, than talking about that person and keeping their memory alive and knowing that other people remember them. And knowing that, you know, they may not be here in life anymore, but the relationship never ends. They will always be in your heart, and, you know, their birthdays are always significant, and the relationships don't die. So, you know, we've learned a lot, certainly in the 51 years since I went through this tragedy. The other thing that was really unusual about this situation was that we couldn't start sitting Shiva until we had funerals, and we couldn't have funerals until they identified bodies or parts of bodies. So the whole Shiva was dragged out way longer than a typical Shiva would have been. And it was incredibly difficult to be there in our house, in a small house in Côte Saint-Luc, with police having to direct the traffic because there were so many cars and so many people coming and going, and all of the uncertainty and not knowing whether or not we could start sitting Shiva, and all the different rabbis coming to our home and giving different opinions about how to proceed and how not to proceed. And I just remember locking myself in the bathroom with our family cat and just waiting until everybody would just get out of our house. That's the most vivid memory I have of that entire Shiva period. And right after we finally did have some funerals and finished Shiva, the house went into a complete state of silence. It was like everybody just faded away. Nobody knew how to talk to us or how to deal with us. And so they probably thought that if they don't mention it, somehow we won't remember, or they won't trigger any sadness or unhappiness for us. So they didn't mention anything. And it was almost as if my father and I were left to deal with this completely on our own, with no professional help. There was no professional help available back then, and no outpouring of support as you would get nowadays. So we really did feel like we were alone on this island of grief. And our home went from this extremely busy, noisy house full of company to a silent, empty home. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them because, as I said earlier, I love talking about them and keeping their memory alive. So if we could see slide 7, please. That's my mother on the left. And then there's the 5 of us at a wedding a year before the accident. And my sisters on the right, Carla and Wendy. So thank you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our family. My mother's name was Rita. She was 39 years old when she died. She was a bookkeeper. She did volunteer work for what was then known as the Montreal Association for the Mentally Retarded. And so as a family, we were all involved in doing volunteer work, and not only fundraising, but we actually had events with kids who we would now refer to as kids with Downs, where we had parties with them at a school called the Peter Hall School. And I remember just feeling like it was just so much fun to spend time with these kids, because for us, they were just kids. There was no difference. We were introduced to kids with special needs at such a young age, which I do believe certainly nowadays kids are integrated with other kids and they're just kids. So it was an amazing opportunity back in the 60s to be introduced to kids and to be able to spend time with them and get to know them and know that we were making a difference in their lives. We always had people at our house. My mother was always inviting friends and relatives, and every celebration, our dining room, our small little house in Côte Saint-Luc was just packed with people. And, my mother, basically her motto in life was be happy, be healthy, and do things for others. And she really did show us through her actions that that was very important to her. My sister Carla was 11 when she died. She was really studious. She read books. She did needlepoint. She loved animals. And she always said she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. Wendy was 8. She was our little entertainer. She was incredibly energetic and funny and always dancing around and hyper. And she said when she grew up, she wanted to be an actress. I was the responsible one in the family. I walked dogs in the neighborhood. I started babysitting. I used to like cleaning and cooking. And that was why I ended up going to California the week earlier, because my mother probably knew that she would get to this apartment and it would be set up just perfectly. My father was 44 years old. He was really funny. He had a great sense of humor. He remembered jokes like nobody else. He was always schmoozing with people, and he would do absolutely anything for anyone. He was really good-hearted, and he never referred to us by our names. He always called us number 1, number 2, and number 3. And so we lived in Côte Saint-Luc. It wasn't a fancy life. We didn't go on fancy vacations or anything, but my childhood memories are incredibly happy. And like I said, we learned through our family's values and through the way our parents raised us that it's important to be happy and healthy and make a difference in the lives of others. And I'm really grateful that I had that memory and that was instilled in me, because I believe that is one of the big reasons why I was able to move forward. But I'll get into more details soon. But what I really want everybody to understand is that my father and I were both dealing with this same tragedy. We had both gone through the same tragedy, but we both had very different abilities about how to deal with it. And it's not that I was stronger or better equipped. It was that I looked at my father, who was so broken and so devastated, and I thought, I can't live that way. I can't spend my days the way my father does, which is just in a state of constant sadness, which I completely and totally understand. He went through this horrific tragedy with absolutely no help or support from anybody, other than really loving family members and friends who were amazing, but they didn't know how to support us in the best way. And their way was just not to talk about it, clear out their stuff. All my mother's and sister's things were taken out really soon after the accident. And we were just left to sort of have to deal with this tragedy on our own. So one of the things I learned back then, and I still say it to this day, is my father and I were in the same storm, but we were each in our own boat. We each had a very different boat that we were trying to navigate. And my father really never, ever recovered. He did end up getting married again 2 years after the plane crash. And for those of you who have read Repairing Rainbows, I get into some of the details about what life was like with my dad's wife. And it was very challenging and very difficult. And, having done the kind of work I've done now with grieving kids, it boggles my mind when I think about the way my father's wife dealt with me and with my dad. But I guess, she was an excellent teacher in terms of showing me that this is not how you treat someone who's just gone through a tragedy. But what I did in order to move forward, because I was so determined that I was going to be happy again and live my life in the best way I possibly could, I stayed really, really busy. I immersed myself in my schoolwork. I did volunteer work. I spent lots of time with my grandparents. I was really close with my mother's parents and really loved spending time with them. So I did a lot with them, and they were so broken and so devastated that, being with them was really comforting for me. And I just basically faked joy. I pretended to be happy because for me, that was how people wanted to be around me. People didn't want to be around. I didn't think they'd want to be around me if I was crying and grieving and sad. So by putting a smile on my face and pretending everything was fine, I felt like that way, at least I could surround myself with people and somehow get through life. And fortunately, I did all of that because at 17, I met Barry. And when Barry and I met, it was pretty unbelievable when I had heard his story, because we met just a few months after Barry's father had died. And when he told me what he had been through, I could not believe I met someone who really understood tragedy and loss the way I understood it, but also had an attitude like I did about moving forward and wanting to live a happy and meaningful life. So Barry's story is that when he was 7 months old, his mother and his brother was 4 years old, his mother died, and his father came home and found his wife dead on the kitchen floor, and his 7-month-old Barry and the 4-year-old in the kitchen crying. And so his dad had to raise these two boys on his own. But what made his life even more challenging was that Barry's older brother, Mitchell, was quite delayed, developmentally delayed, and he really never developed beyond the mental age of about 6 or so. So Barry's dad had to raise two boys on his own and raise a child with special needs during a time when there was absolutely no help from the community or the schools. People didn't understand what children with special needs needed. So I think he was quite challenged and ashamed, and it was just a really difficult time for him as a single dad. And when Barry was 17 and his brother Mitchell was 21, they were out washing the car with their dad, and their dad dropped dead of a heart attack right in front of them. So here Barry was left with a brother with special needs, no parents, no money, and nowhere to live because they couldn't live in the apartment they had been living with their dad in. And I met him just a few months after that. And we both agreed that we don't want to have a pity party together. We actually want to find a way to build a life together. And we shared a lot of the same values, and we decided we were going to do what we needed to do to go to university. So we did part-time jobs to pay for McGill. I washed hair at a hair salon, and I also waited tables at Picnic in Cavendish Mall for those Montrealers who are on. And Barry worked at a gas station, at a full service gas station. And he also, in the summertime, worked at General Motors welding cars, where he would make incredible money, enough to pay for his tuition and living expenses, but he would get burned along his chest because they had no health and safety back then. It was just like crazy having to do this kind of job without any protection. But anyways, we did what we had to do, and we went to McGill. And when we were 22, we got married and we moved to California because he got a really great job there and I got a great job in a hospital. And we decided that we would start our life away from Montreal, away from where we had only difficult and challenging memories. And so we lived in California for 4 years. And we decided that it was too far from Montreal, too far from family. And we also didn't want to raise kids there. So we moved back to Toronto, and we've been living here ever since. So what we have often talked about is what choices did we make? Because people always used to say to us, wow, you've been through so much, and it's so hard to believe that you could still be happy and you could still, raise your kids in a really productive way. And what's your secret? And, we often used to say, well, what choice did we have? But really, when we thought about it, we realized we did have choices and we made choices. And so what we've done is we've taken some of our wounds and turned them into wisdom. And we call our 8 happiness-inducing choices, turning our wounds into wisdom. And I will share them with you. So the first slide, please. Oh, I forgot to show the slide of when Barry and I met. the next slide, that's us from 17, 18, 19, maybe up till about 22. Oh yeah, our wedding, 22. Okay, thank you. The next slide is our number one happiness-inducing choice. Surround yourself with positive, optimistic people. I really do believe that people can inspire you or they can drain you. And I really think it's important that we stay away from negative, difficult, critical, controlling, and miserable people. They are exhausting to be around, and they never have anything positive to say. They suck the life out of us. Okay, we could close the slide. Thank you. And I think it's a really important choice to make, to choose to be around people who are positive and who make you feel good and who you know are bringing out the best in you and you feel like you're your best version of yourself. Number two is, second slide, please. Stay busy and continue to learn and grow. I love this. If you keep your grind right, it will keep your mind right. I think if we have too much time, and I think we're all learning that in the last year and a half, a lot of free time can be really dangerous. Our minds can go into bad places. We can overthink and overanalyze things. So I think it's really important that we spend our time doing things that are meaningful, keep us busy, keep us interested, engaged, inspired, just finding things that are interesting, maybe getting out of your comfort zone. One of the things, thank you for the slide. One of the things that I've done in the past 10 years is I've gone on 3 road trips with our younger daughter, Kim, starting when she was 23 years old. Kim and I rented a 32-foot RV and we took our 3 dogs and we went on a 3-week road trip. Talk about doing something completely different, totally out of my comfort zone. I never thought I could drive a 32-foot RV. It's huge. It's like almost a bus. And we went to campgrounds. We had to hook up the RV and we met the most incredible people. It gave us a lot of time to reflect on life and on our choices. It made me realize how lucky I am that I have a husband who supported this crazy idea of me going on a road trip with our daughter, but we loved it so much. We ended up doing it 2 more times. So we've gone on 3 road trips in this huge RV. And if you ever want to try something completely different than any other kind of trip, rent an RV and go and meet people in RV parks and just sit around the campfire and get to know people from other worlds. And it's just the most incredible experience. And driving through small towns and seeing the way other people live and meeting meeting people from small towns. It was just an amazing experience. So when I say continue to learn and grow and evolve, that's some of the things that I would recommend doing if you want to really look at how life is really about the journey and not just the destination. The next one is to help others. Number 3, please. And as I said, I've always said, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And I think it's so important for us to remember that we never know what people are dealing with. We never know what kinds of issues or challenges people are dealing with in their life. And if you can reach out and make a difference in someone else's life and help someone who's struggling, then I think you should really do everything you can to make that happen. Part of our core Jewish values is to extend ourselves to others, to be kind, to show compassion, to repair whatever might be broken in somewhere in the world or in someone else's life. For me, the people who helped me the most were the people who invited me for dinner when I was 13 and 14 years old, because my father was never home. So it meant that I was going home to an empty house and having to make myself something for dinner and stand at the counter and eat it. And so for me, the heroes in my life then were the people who thought, why don't you come and have dinner with us? And, you know, it may sound like something so insignificant, but it really meant the world to me. And you don't have to be a professional hero to make a difference in someone's life. You can extend yourself and do the smallest thing. And for that person on the receiving end, it could be huge, and you could make a big difference in someone's life. What I also did was I volunteered at Maimonides, and I also volunteered at the Jewish General Hospital on the floor where the kids were, because back in the 70s, kids were not allowed to have visitors except during visiting hours. So I'd take the bus to the Jewish General Hospital and volunteer with kids. And even though I was dealing with my own tragedy and my own loss, I looked at these kids who were bald, they were hooked up to IVs, they were so sick. And I thought, I'm so lucky, at least I have my health. And I would make them laugh and we would have fun. And I looked forward to spending time with them. And I realized that laughter is great medicine, and it just took my mind off my own problems and made me feel like life was really meaningful. And I think that we need to understand how important it is when we reach out and help others and what a difference that makes for us. The next one is expressing gratitude. I can't say enough about how gratitude is an incredible choice. Choosing to look at what you're grateful for in your life forces you to feel better about your life and to focus on the things that are going well in your life, versus people who are never grateful and spend their time complaining they don't have enough and nothing is ever good enough and no one ever does things well enough. And I find that people who don't know how to be grateful are often extremely jealous and greedy and just so unhappy. And we need to count our blessings. We always need to find ways to look at what's working well in our life and to be grateful for it. So just to put my money where my mouth is, when my kids were little, I remember feeling really sorry for us that we didn't have grandparents in their lives. And I felt like everywhere we went, there were grandparents. We would go to school plays and we were the only two sitting there with no grandparents, and we would go to the pediatrician's office and we were not there with grandparents. And it just felt like my kids were so cheated out of grandparents that I decided I was going to get them grandparents. And I put an ad in the Canadian Jewish News for surrogate grandparents. And in theory, I still think it was a brilliant idea, because I knew there had to be people out there who didn't have grandchildren of their own and would really want to spend time with our family. And I didn't want anything from them except people to come for Friday night dinner or Sunday brunch, and for our kids to have that next generation of people who they could refer to as their grandparents. But unfortunately, the people who applied for the position were not exactly what I had expected. And after about the third interview, I remember we got back in the car and our kids said to us, "This is probably not one of your better ideas. And do we have to keep interviewing people?" And at that time, I realized that, first of all, I'm so grateful that I have a husband who went along with this crazy idea. I have such cute kids who really tried hard to impress these people, and it just didn't work out. But I decided that I really need to focus on what I do have and not what I don't have. And interesting, as soon as I started focusing on how grateful I am for having this beautiful little family that I have, I didn't notice the grandparents everywhere anymore, because it didn't become my focus anymore. Now I really noticed what I did have. So I do believe gratitude makes a huge difference. The next one is to look ahead and don't look back, and to grow through what you go through. We all get lost. We all make mistakes. We all take wrong turns. And we really need to remember that when things go well, that's wonderful. And if we make mistakes, we need to learn from them and we need to grow through them. And, we spend a lot of time looking back and feeling regretful and making decisions based on what we should have done or could have done or would have done, when in fact, I think it's so important to look ahead, look at where you are and look ahead at what you want to be doing that's different and that feels better. And I think the most important way to remember that is to think about I know for me, the lady who lives in my car and tells me how to get places, my GPS lady. When I want to go somewhere and I enter the address of where I want to go, if I turn right instead of left, she has never said to me, I can't believe that you turned right instead of left. Last week, you also turned right instead of left. And 3 weeks ago, I remember you also made a wrong turn. She doesn't scold me. She doesn't judge me. We don't get into a whole back and forth about why I didn't listen to her. She simply says, recalculating. And I think we need to remember to recalculate. Sometimes we need to look at where we are and where we want to go and just figure out how to get there and not spend all our time talking about what we should have done or could have done. So I think we have a lot to learn from that lady. The next one is number 6, have faith and have patience. There will be many chapters in your life. Don't get lost in the one you're in now. I think that applies now so much because we're all so in this state of uncertainty still, and we're all trying to figure out what's going to happen and when is it going to happen. And we don't have all the answers, but it's not going to be our forever. It's right now. And if we have faith and we have patience, we will get through this and we will look back and hopefully we will have learned a tremendous amount. And I think we need to remember that we can't give up because something is tough right now. We need to be patient. We need to have faith that things will get better. And we have to sometimes let things unfold in their own time. And that's definitely a lesson we're all learning now. The next one, super important, spend time with animals. As Bonnie mentioned, we have 3 dogs, and I showed you a picture of our dogs, and we have so much to learn from animals. My daughter Kim and I certainly learned that when we were on our road trip, spending our time with our 3 dogs. They are just so incredibly faithful and forgiving. Everything I'm talking about today, they understand. They're always grateful. They love unconditionally. They're always wanting to help others. They're super patient. And I think that's why they only have to live about 10 or 12 years. It takes us like decades to learn what dogs know every single day of their life. And not everybody wants to have them living in their house, but we certainly have lots to learn from them. And last but not least is choose positive thoughts. We do get to choose our thoughts. And we do get to decide whether we're going to choose positive thoughts or negative thoughts. And we even get to change our thoughts. So when a negative thought pops in our head, we can choose to change it to something more positive. And, you only speak to yourself more than you speak to anyone at all. So it's really great to learn how to speak to yourself in a really positive way and to say nice things to yourself and say positive things to yourself. Some people are amazing at telling other people in the most positive way about how they should do things or how they should feel about themselves, but they don't speak to themselves that nicely. So I think it's important that we learn how to choose these positive thoughts and speak to ourselves in the most positive way possible. The way I could explain this one is when I first started speaking, I was talking to an audience of about 300 women, and literally front and center, there was a woman who was spending her entire time on her phone, and it looked like she was texting and texting and texting. And I was so distracted by her, I couldn't really focus on my conversation with the audience because I was focused on this woman. And I realized afterwards that I need to take my own advice and choose my thoughts. So what I decided from then on was anytime I see anyone using their phone while I'm speaking to an audience, I say to myself, they're taking notes. So slow down, talk a little bit slower, talk a little more clearly because you don't want them to miss anything. Now that may or may not be true. They may be texting, but it doesn't matter because if I choose to think that they are taking notes, then that motivates me and it makes me feel much more engaged with the audience compared to wondering why this person is texting the whole time. And by the way, every time I tell that story, somebody always comes over to me when we were doing live audiences to say, I really was taking notes. Don't worry, I really was. So those are the 8 happiness inducing choices. And like I said at the beginning, I hope that sharing some of these ideas and some of the strategies that we have used through our life can inspire anyone else who's going through any kind of difficult time. And one of the most important lessons that we've learned through our lives is that you can continue to grieve a loss and miss those people, and at the same time experience joy and gratitude and happiness. They can coexist. And I think once people learn that you can be sad and happy in the same lifetime, and you can be sad and happy even at a simcha, knowing that there are people missing and we miss them so terribly, but we're also celebrating. And it sort of goes along with what the Fiddler on the Roof song, the words in the Fiddler on the Roof song are, where they say, to life, l'chaim, 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 to life. Life has a way of confusing us, blessing and bruising us. So drink l'chaim, to life. And I think that really says it all. So there you go.
Thank you, Lynda. And don't go away from your screens yet, because the best is yet to come. Lynda will graciously answer questions. You can send them through the chat. Just send a message and we'll get it to her. But there's just something I wanted to, that I see came through on the chat. It was actually a question, and I'm going to read it to you. I lost my first wife to cancer over 16 years ago. I've been fortunate to meet a second unbelievably wonderful woman with whom I share my life for 6.5 years. Yet I still cry several times per year when someone asks about my first wife. Will this crying for the woman who died over 16 years ago ever stop? Or will it only stop when I leave this world? And I think, Lynda, you just said so, but you can recap it for this gentleman.
You know what? I really believe loss does not happen and then unhappen. We, just like we were talking about with 9/11, 20 years maybe sounds like such a long time, but loss doesn't go away. We learn how to build our life around that loss. And like I also said, you can be very happy and happy in a new relationship, but you can still have plenty of room in your heart to miss the person who died, and they can coexist.
Thank you, Lynda. Here's another question. When friends said nothing and no teachers intervened, what would you have wanted or needed them to do or say in terms of specific things to support you?
Well, it's interesting. I'll tell you what did happen in my first year at Wager in grade 8. I hung pictures of my mother and sisters in my locker because my father wouldn't let me hang pictures in the house. He took all the pictures down. Nobody ever wanted to talk about them. I felt like that was the only place that I could actually have pictures in a safe place where I could see them. And one of my teachers walked by my locker when it was open and told me to take the pictures down. It was inappropriate. So I guess what we now know is that the opportunity to talk about this tragedy, I wish I would have had what we have now, which is like Myra's Kids in Montreal, or what we used to have here in Toronto is a center for grieving kids where I could meet other kids who had gone through a tragedy to see that we had something in common and that there were other people out there who had also gone through something, and, maybe share some strategies, just the support, the acknowledgement, the validation. None of that happened. And watching my father suffer with no help, nowadays he would have been given so much more help and support that he might have been able to live out his days in a much happier way.
Thank you, Lynda. if we're on the subject of your late father, somebody wanted to know about his second wife, and if you were ever able to reconcile your relationship with her and the way you felt she treated your dad and yourself.
No, we were never able to reconcile.
When you went to California, what happened to Barry's brother? Where did he go?
So Barry's brother, we ended up sending him to Israel for a while, where he lived on a kibbutz. And we thought that would be a really great way for him to learn how to be a bit more independent. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So he did come back to Montreal, and we connected him. This is before we left. All of this happened. We connected him to Jewish Vocational Services in Montreal, and they were amazing. They put him into a sheltered workshop type of environment, and then they found him a job and oversaw that for close to 20 years. And he managed in that same job incredibly well until about 6 months before the book came out in 2010, when he got swine flu and died.
Awful. Oh, this is something interesting. Would you be able to elaborate on the psychic you met with?
Well, what I will say is that I didn't even know that there was such a thing as mediums until a friend of mine told us about this medium. And what we found was, by going to talk to someone who confirmed for us that our family members were still in our life in some way, was incredibly comforting. That's all we really wanted to know, was that even though they weren't with us in human form, they hadn't really left us, and that all the signs and messages that we had received through the years were actually truly signs from them that they were still close by. So the comfort we got from that was incredible.
Yes, there's somebody else who says, I have pictures of my living room with my mom, dad, and aunt since 2003. I needed to have these memories to help me carry on. And I think it's just so tragic that they took those memories, those photos away from you.
But they thought that that would help us get over this tragedy. Really, nobody knew how to deal with this tragedy. They didn't know how to deal with us. I can remember in Côte St. Luc, we lived on McMurray, which was a cul-de-sac. And I remember people driving by and stopping in front of the house and just staring at the house, somehow as if we were like a freak show in there or something. Like, I don't know what they thought they were going to see, but people were just, they did not know how to deal with it.
What would have been helpful to you from people who came to the Shiva? As you said, you locked yourself in your room.
Yeah. Well, I think what would have been helpful, and I think what we're supposed to do at Shivas, is to talk about the people who died and to keep their memory alive, or to at least, be there for the sake of talking about the people who died. And instead, I felt like people came to share their own sorrows and their own stories, because they thought that would somehow give us comfort. Well, you're not the only ones who've gone through this. And so that was why I escaped, because I was already feeling like I was in this unbelievable nightmare that couldn't possibly be true. And now you're going to add even more horrible stories to my daily life. It was just so strange.
So wrong, just seems so wrong. Let's talk about the other people on the flight. There were 109 people killed. Have you ever met any of them? And was there any commemoration of the crash? People would like to know how you've done that, if you've done it.
Well, it's pretty unbelievable because it would never happen nowadays. But what happened back then was we did not meet any of the other family members at all. In fact, I think quite the opposite happened. We were kept apart from them really quickly because I would imagine from Air Canada's point of view, they didn't want us all to collude and join forces in suing them. So, and there was no social media. They just didn't have the ability to connect us all. So about close to 40 years later, there were a few families, including my family, that got together and spoke with the developers in the area where the actual crash site had occurred. And we got the city and the builders in the area to put together a memorial and to actually make the crash site a cemetery, which it is now. So we all met for the first time 40 years later, as many families as we could get in touch with, and everybody did come to this crash site, and we unveiled this beautiful memorial. And now we have a place to go that we believe is where they really are buried. It took 40 years.
Wow. Unbelievable. I wanted to talk about the cover of your book and the picture of the doll. I don't know if I have your book. There was a picture that was in the Gazette. And can you tell us about it?
Yes. It's a picture of a doll, and that picture appeared on the front page of the Montreal Star the day after the plane crash. And when that newspaper was delivered to our house, I can't even begin to describe how the family felt, because that was Wendy's doll, my younger sister Wendy's doll. And that was a doll that she schlepped with her everywhere she went. And for some strange reason, it was pretty much one of the only identifiable items at the crash site. And so I really wanted to use that picture on the cover of the book, but I was worried that if I used it without permission, that whoever the photographer was or the star or whoever would sue me without, because I didn't have permission. So our son is really good with technology and graphic design. So he was going to create a cover for the book, but nothing felt right. And then about 2 months before the book was going to be published, Barry and I were going on a trip with one of the pharmaceutical companies. And so I said, okay, I'm going to bring the book with me, the manuscript, and we'll figure out the cover. And when we get back, we're going to send it to print, and somehow we're just going to figure this all out. And we were scheduled to go to Mexico, and that was in April. The book was coming out in June. And literally days before our scheduled trip to Mexico, it was switched to Punta Cana because people didn't want to go to Mexico back in April of 2010. There were some issues there. So we said, okay, whatever, we don't care. We're going to Punta Cana. So we go to Punta Cana, and when we check in, Barry's quite a workaholic. And, he likes to check on things in the middle of the night, and he needed access to a business center. So when we checked in, they said, sorry, your level of room doesn't give you access to the business center. And he said, well, can you just give us the bracelets so we can get into the business center? And they said, well, we'll give you the bracelets, because we didn't want to upgrade our room and be in a different level than everybody else. They said, we'll give you the bracelets, but you have to promise you'll only use it to go into the business center, and you won't use it for the private beach, and you won't use it for certain restaurants. We said, don't worry, we're only going to use it for the business center. So the next day, of course, we had these bracelets. We said, let's go to the private beach. Like, that was probably one of the most rebellious things we've ever done. But we go to this private beach, and we're sitting there, and I've got the manuscript all spread out, and I'm reading it. And there's this woman named Heidi on the beach. I will never forget her. And she started chatting with me. And when I told her what my book was about, she goes, oh my God, stay right here. And she goes over to a man on this private beach, brings him back, and introduces him to me as an Air Canada pilot. Anyways, he said to me, when I told him what the book was about, he said, was that on July 5th, 1970? And I said, yes. And he goes, oh my God, he turned pale as could be. He said, I saw that plane go down. And I had never, ever met anybody who had witnessed the plane crash or had any details about it. Apparently, he's 3 years older than me. He was 16 at the time, and he used to drive to the Toronto airport every Sunday morning and watch the planes take off and land. And his dream was to be a pilot. And he said he saw the plane go down. He told me exactly what had happened. And then it took off again and crashed 7 miles from the airport. He got in his car and he drove to the crash site. He was the first person at the crash site. And I just sat with my chin on the sand because I said, oh my God, what are the chances of me meeting this man who had this detailed witness of what had happened? I couldn't believe it. And when I told him about the cover and I showed him the picture, I had the original newspaper clipping with me. And I told him about my dilemma about getting permission. He said, stay right here. He went and got his wife, who works for the Toronto Star. And she said, when we get back home, I will find out who the photographer is, which she did. And then I was able to go to his house and buy the rights to use the picture. But what are the chances that here we're supposed to be in Mexico and we're in Punta Cana and we're not supposed to be on this private beach, but we're on this private beach and we happen to sit down next to this woman? So that's the long answer to how we chose that picture and got permission to use it.
Yeah, quite an iconic picture, and I'm sure all those who were around in Montreal at that time will never forget it. And just speaking of pictures, I don't know if it's the same gentleman who asked before about his wife who's been deceased over 16 years. Is it okay to keep family pictures in the house, which include my wife, my late wife?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look at their pictures and treasure the memories, 100%.
What do you attribute your ability to make the good choices? Like, was it faith? Was it family? What do you feel?
I really give my mother a huge amount of credit for those first 13 years of teaching us those incredible values about what's important in life. And you know, teaching us that aside from being happy and healthy, you need to make a difference in the lives of other people. That gives meaning to life. And that certainly gave me the opportunity to attach some meaning to this tragedy and to move forward, knowing that I was following in her footsteps and hopefully doing what I thought would continue to make her proud. And the choices, you know, one of my other favorite expressions is we need contrast for clarity. I saw what my father's life was like, and I saw how broken he was and how tortured he was every single day. And I couldn't imagine living that way. I couldn't imagine continuing the rest of my life in a state of such despair. So I really made a conscious choice to be happy. And I think Barry would say the same thing, that he looked at his father had such a difficult life. He did the best that he could with these two boys under such difficult circumstances. And, you know, the most important thing for Barry was to make sure that our kids felt safe and secure and happy, and that, you know, we did everything we could to make sure that our values were passed along to them. And we're so proud of the 3 kids and the choices that they make and the way they live their lives. And you know, we watch the way our daughter parents her kids, her 2 boys, and it just makes us so incredibly proud to see that we really have passed along the ability to make really good choices about how to live your life and how to live a meaningful life.
And so are there any tips, parenting tips, about how to teach kids to be more resilient, more self-reliant? I mean, in this world where we're all helicopter parents and we try to protect them from terrible things in the world, is there some kind of armor or some kind of ammunition. And where do you think faith plays, or belief in God plays in this?
Okay, well, those are very separate questions, but obviously quite connected. I would say that teaching children the most important lessons to teach our kids, and for me, the most important lesson that I learned for my first 13 years was how important it is to be kind to other people, to be compassionate, to reach out and help others, to make a difference, to not only focus on yourself. And, you know, we teach our kids through our own actions. So when people show their kids through their own kindness how to treat other people, then that's the best way to arm them with kindness, with what they need to be good people. I'm not going to say that we were not helicopter parents because of what we went through. There's no question we were probably way more protective and, you know, as involved as we possibly could be with our kids and with everything that went on in their lives. But I don't know. I mean, there's lots of ways to make sure that our kids understand our core Jewish values, which I think are the guides that we all need to live a meaningful life. But, you know, I think what I learned most important during the first 13 years was, like I said, what my mother always said: make sure you do things for other people, and not in a martyr way, in a really genuine way of enjoying giving and making a difference in the lives of other people.
Kindness. Yeah.
And as far as faith, absolutely. I think we have to keep the faith no matter what.
Okay, there's another, somebody's interested if you felt any connection with Holocaust survivors that had lost their families in a tragic way.
Absolutely. I think most people who finally started talking about what had gone on during the Holocaust and the losses that they suffered would agree that they were told to keep it silent for so many years, and they didn't have an opportunity to talk about what they'd been through. And when they finally were able to come out and share stories, and that's when we started to see so many books coming out and so many blogs about it and stories. And absolutely, there's so many similarities.
Okay, there's just a comment here, if I can read it. You said before that you had to show a happy face for people to stay in your life. I know that's what I did. I became a widow when I was 28 years old, and I had a three-month-old infant, a severely handicapped child of 5, and a daughter of 4. And that's what I did. I acted as if. I heard somewhere that sometimes if you act it long enough, then you might start to internalize it and feel it. But I'm sure that must have been very difficult.
Well, people used to say, if you fake joy, you can make joy.
Just bear with me for one moment while I'm just looking. There are many thanks from many people, which we'll pass on to you. But if there's any other questions, please send them in through the chat, because we're slowly wrapping up. Losing my husband suddenly, he was 49. Sorry, I just lost it. He was our husband, our go-to source of strength. Any suggestions? I guess the lady is looking for how to cope, how to grieve, and how to go on.
Yeah, well, since that's such a loaded question, my suggestion is that you find sources of exactly that, how to grieve, how to keep memories alive, how to talk to other people, how to memorialize people. Just, there's so many sources out there. It's incredible. But we now know how important it is to talk about people who died and to keep their memory alive.
I think I'd like to just wrap up, and if I can invite Rabbi Whitman to make some final comments. I think this was really a wonderful, wonderful talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bonnie. First of all, Lynda, thank you so much. You have been so generous in sharing your wisdom in a way that is accessible and applicable to every one of us in all kinds of situations. The idea of transforming your wounds into wisdom is something that everyone can learn from. And so much of what you say reflects the most authentic Jewish teaching. So I'm very grateful to you for giving all of us the opportunity to be inspired by your words and by your story. There's a novel that I read recently. It's a remarkable novel titled After the Flood by Cassandra Montag. And she writes words that I think reflect the essence of what you've said and what needs to be said. I've lost and will lose. The room in my heart, though, will grow with loss and not contract. I am not the shards of a broken glass, but the water let loose from it, the uncontainable thing that will not shatter and stay broken. And you, Lynda, are one that did not shatter and stay broken, but allowed water to become loose and to nourish. And you have nourished us. And we thank you very much. On behalf of everyone here, I want to wish you, Lynda, Shana Tova, a very happy and healthy new year. And to everyone who's joined, may we take this wisdom and incorporate it into our lives to bring ourselves lives of joy. Thank you so, so much.